I've wanted to build a router table forever now, and I finally got around to designing and building one. If you're thinking of building one, follow along in this video, and if you make it to the end, I'll tell you how to get a free set of plans. Let's get into it. So being that this is a shop cabinet, and I plan on painting them in the future, I used some finished grade pine plywood for the carcass of the cabinet. To break down the plywood, I got to try out two new tools, one being the Bora Centipede. This is not sponsored by them, or anyone else for that matter, but I have provided affiliate links below that do help support the channel if you're interested in any of the products in this video. Anyway, being that I work in about a quarter of a two-car garage 90% of the time, this portable work platform will definitely be a nice addition. It sets up extremely quickly and is folded up just as fast. I have to say I was skeptical when taking it out of the box, but after using it, I think it'll be a very helpful addition. To make this process efficient as possible, I made a cut list based on my design and began breaking down the plywood sheets. Before getting to that, I want to take a quick second to say I appreciate your view on this video, but 98% of you guys actually are not subscribed. So if you could take a quick second and go down below the video and click the subscribe button, as well as the bell icon, that would be greatly appreciated. This will help keep you updated anytime I post a new video, and best of all, it's totally free. Thank you for that, and let's get back to the video. When cutting down any of these sheets, I like to take the factory edge off, as they are often very rough compared to the finish I can achieve with the track saw. For this, I broke out the two tracks and combined them into one long track. To get the track straight, I came up with this trick to flip the track over with the connections loose and pushing the lip of the track against the edge of the plywood before tightening them down. And I have to say, I think the results speak for themselves. And this is where I got to use the second new tool, or accessory rather. I kept seeing these right angle attachments for the track of the track saw, and I decided to bite the bullet on a budget version. I have to say, this is a huge time saver, and the few test cuts that I performed prior to making this video were very accurate. The last main components I had to cut for the carcass were some drawer dividers and stretchers. To get these to width, I broke out the table saw, as these were much more manageable than the big cabinet carcass panels, and I had to make multiple pieces of the same size. When possible, try to cut all of your repeat dimensions at the same time, as this makes it much more efficient and much more accurate on the table saw. To get them the final length, I used the miter saw, and this is the first project I've used my miter saw station that I built in my last video, and I have to say, I'm loving it. There'll be a link to that video at the end of this video if you're interested in watching it, and I also have a free set of plans. Before assembling the carcass, I had a few more steps. I cut the 1/4-inch dado to accept the back panel using the table saw, and then got to drilling all my pocket holes that would secure the cabinet together. I know, people hate on pocket holes, but for a shop cabinet, I think they're just fine. And here's a shot of my fiance being weird and practicing with the new gimbal she just got. Now that all the pocket holes are drilled, I started assembling the cabinet. Unfortunately, I'll be honest, I started to get aggravated when working on the small outfeed section of my workbench and decided to assemble it on the floor, and I didn't get the first few steps on camera. A trick I ended up using to install the vertical dividers in the carcass was I used the two drawer divider panels as spacers to get everything perfectly even. After installing these vertical dividers, I marked out the locations for the drawer support and installed these with pocket holes. For the center divider, I went with a fixed shelf in order to separate the area the router would live to help keep sawdust from getting in the rest of the cabinet, which I installed the same way with pocket holes. To wrap up the carcass, I cut out a piece of 1/4-inch plywood for the back panel, and I slid it into the dados on the back of the cabinet. I secured this with a few brad nails before moving on to adding the second of 3 layers that would make up the cabinet top. Being that there was a slight bow in the top, I used 2 separate pieces and some shims to get everything perfectly flat to accept the final finished top surface. 1.5 inch top may seem like overkill, but you'll see when I fire this thing up that there's no chattering or resonance when using it. Next, I got a bit of help unloading the poplar for the drawers and door faces. There is some extra here for a project that you'll see in the next video where I will actually get to use this router table for the first time. While I had my brother around, I figured I would take a little bit of advantage and use him to help me move this piece of 3/4 inch melamine so I could cut it to size for the finished top and get the rest put away so we can move on to the next step, which was making the drawer boxes. For the drawer boxes, I used some 3/4 inch pine, and this is where I made a little mistake. I always make these drawer boxes like an 1/8 inch too wide and end up having to trim them down later on. You'll see later on that when I try to insert the drawer boxes into the cabinet carcass with the drawer slides, they're just a little bit too tight. Anyway, I was originally going to rabbet them together, but I opted to use pocket holes to secure them instead. For the bottom, I used the same 1/4 inch ply that I used for the back panel and added a dado to hold them in. Referencing my model, I made another cut list to cut the stiles and rails as efficiently as possible. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to mill my own lumber yet, so for now I have to stick with this store-bought stuff, and sadly this stuff isn't the straightest, but a trick I found and used a few times now is buying a board that's a little more than 2 times the width of the stiles and rails, and cut those to the length of your pieces. Then I rip these down into the proper width on the table saw. This helps minimize any bowing or twisting in these pieces. It might not be perfect, but it's the best way I found to do this with the equipment I have. After cutting everything to the proper width and length, I started making the dados and tongues to form the shaker style doors to match my other cabinets. If you see my previous videos, I outlined this process a little more in depth, but I currently do all of this on the table saw as that's really my only option. It takes a bit of fine tuning, but you can actually get a decent fit up using this method. You'll see at the end of this video, it's about to get a whole lot easier when the router table is up and running. With all the door and drawer faces cut and ready to go, I cut down some 1/4 inch MDF for the inner panels. Like I mentioned earlier, I will eventually be painting all my shop cabinets, so MDF is the best material for this, in my case. Now that the center panels were cut, I got to gluing and clamping all these faces together, and with that out of the way, I sanded some strips for the face frames, and once the glue was dry on the drawer faces, I sanded those as well. Before getting to mounting any of these shaker panels, I added that edge banding you saw me sanding before with a bit of glue and some small 18 gauge brad nails. Around this time, the drawer slides showed up, and I could mount the drawer boxes in the cabinet, and this is where I realized I made them a bit too large, like I mentioned before. I ended up having to hand plane them down, so if you want to save yourself some time, make these the right size the first time. Now it was finally time to add the shaker panels, starting with the doors. To attach these, I used my Craig hinge jig to mount the European hinges. This jig is relatively inexpensive and is worth every penny if you're going to be installing this type of hinge. After mounting the doors, I moved to mounting the drawer faces. For these, I added a 1/4 inch spacer to fill the back side of the shaker panel, and with the help of a small spacer in the form of a paint stick and some double-sided tape, I set the position just right. After I'd stuck the drawer face with the tape, I pulled the drawer out, clamped down the face of the panel, and screwed them in from the backside. Moving into the next item, I added some casters to the bottom of the cabinet so I can move it around the shop easily. I probably should have done this sooner because this thing is starting to get pretty heavy. I've been searching for a good set of casters for a while now, and these are some of the best I've found. Two more steps and we can move to the good stuff, just bear with me here. The first of those was the melamine top. I chose to screw this in from the bottom, so if I ever needed to replace it, I could do that without destroying the whole cabinet. The last step of the physical cabinet was adding my signature red oak edge band around the top of the melamine edge to prevent it from being damaged. This was done with some glue and a few finish nails. Now for the fun part, opening up all the stuff to turn this normal cabinet into a functioning router table. For this I used an O-School adjustable router fence, a DeWalt 2¼ horsepower router, and a Craig professional router lift. To reiterate, I'm not sponsored by anyone. I received most of these as gifts, and I know there are some more affordable options, but I have to say the quality of all this stuff is amazing. After getting everything unpacked, I assembled the router fence and got to adjusting the router lift to accept the particular router I decide to go with. If you do planning on picking up this lift, make sure it's compatible with the router you decide to use. On a side note, this router lift is super high quality. To install the lift in the top, I figured I have a laser, so I might as well take advantage of it and make a nice template. I took a few measurements and cut out a piece of MDF. If you're interested in a template file, send me an email, which is in the description below, and I can definitely share that with anyone who's interested. I would also consider selling some of these actual templates if anyone wants one. With the template cut, I measured out the relief cut to allow the router to pass through the top by drilling holes in the corners and cutting out the center with my jigsaw. Then after a quick test fit and another trim, I stuck the template down with some double-sided tape. To cut the physical top, I used a templating router bit to remove the material down to the thickness of the router plate. Once the plate fit in the top, I pushed it flush and screwed it down with some taper-headed screws. One of the final steps of this build was adding some recessed T-track in the top to hold the router fence and hold down some clamps if needed. For this I used a templating bushing and a spiral 1/2-inch router bit with some pieces of scrap wood to guide the router. If you use a melamine top like I did, I would avoid pushing the track in and taking it back out. Unfortunately, I had to take out the track to adjust it the first time, and it caused some small chips on the edge of the melamine. Not a big deal, but it's definitely a little annoying. I then slid the fence on using the supplied hardware and added a remote on-off switch to the side of the cabinet, and that was that for this project. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this build, and I can't wait to use this on the next project I'm going to be working on. This is definitely going to level up my capabilities, and I really look forward to using it beyond some test shots I did in this video. I've also been thinking of a few different laser cut products I can offer you guys at a discounted rate, so if anybody is interested in one of these templates for this router lift, shoot me an email, which can be found in the description below. I'd be happy to make you guys one. I also want to take a second to say thank you for being part of this channel. I really appreciate all the support, and I do love interacting with you guys in the comments, so make sure you leave a comment down below. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.